Okay, I think we're all sort of assembled. Welcome everyone. My name is Benjamin Kamine. I'm from the Jewish Theological Seminary, and it's my pleasure to open this session of the Oxford Interfaith Reading Group on Psalms. And yeah, it's spring. How exciting! And with that excitement, I want to pass it off to the Reverend Dr. John Goldingay, Doctor of Divinity by Archbishop of Canterbury at Lambeth. He is the David Allen Hubbard Professor Emeritus of Old Testament in the School of Theology of Florida Theological Seminary in California, but lives in Oxford, England. He was previously Principal and Professor of Old Testament and Hebrew at St. John's Theological College in Nottingham, England. His books include An Introduction to the Old Testament, A Reader's Guide to the Bible, Reading Jesus' Bible, and commentaries on Psalms, Isaiah, and Daniel. He has also authored a biblical theology, the 3-volume Old Testament theology, and the 17-volume Old Testament for Everyone series, and has published a translation of the entire Old Testament called The First Testament, a new translation. His most recent publication is the New International Commentary on the Book of Jeremiah, and he'll be chairing this session.
Thanks, Ben. Well, in the days when I was a genuine David Allen Hubbard Professor of Old Testament, I knew Dr. Erica Monge-Greer as a master's level student. This is more or less 15 years ago, and knew her as somebody who was an enthusiast about the Old Testament, but who had a much wider range of interests and expertise than that. Was interested in ancient Near Eastern studies and in more broad cultural things, and much of those kind of interests of hers come out in the study she's done of Psalm 82. She describes herself now as a scholar in the Psalms and a biblical ethicist with a specialization in ancient Near Eastern literature. Her research involves justice advocacy for the poor and resistance literature in ancient religious and mythopoetic texts. She has a background in journalism and international business, both fields that inform broad interest in interdisciplinary academic research. Her partner, Joshua, is an entrepreneur and business consultant, and they currently live in Oregon with their 2 children, Caleb and Emma. Erica.
Thank you, Dr. Goldingay. It has been some time since we were together in a classroom in Fuller Seminary many years ago. Well, I want to thank you all for coming today. I am going to open by telling you that the very difficult thing about writing an entire dissertation on a single 8-verse psalm, which I did on Psalm 82, is how to choose which important information to share in a small window of presentation. So today I'm going to give you a summary of the research that I have done that has helped me read Psalm 82 and answer any questions that come out of that. Before I begin, though, I'd love to invite Benjamin Kamine to read the Hebrew version of Psalm 82. Go ahead, Ben.
Sure. Mizmor la'asaf. Elohim nitzav ba'adat el, b'kerev Elohim yishpot. Ad matai tishbetu avel, ufnei reshaim tis'u, Selah. Shiftu dal v'yatom, ani v'rash hatzdiku. Paltu dal v'evyon miyad reshaim hatzilu. Lo yad'u v'lo yavinu b'chashecha yitalacha yimotu kol mostei aretz. Ani amarti Elohim atem uvnei elyon kulchem. Achen ka'adam tmutun u'cha'achad hasarim tipolu. Kuma Elohim shafta ha'aretz ki ata tinchal b'chol hagoyim.
Thank you. Anastasia Fuentes, will you please read the English version? An English version, I should say.
An English version, NRSV. Psalm 82, a plea for justice. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the orphan. Maintain the right of the lowly and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk around in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I say, you are gods, children of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you shall die like mortals and fall like any prince. Rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations belong to you.
Thank you. My work on Psalm 82 was formed out of an eager curiosity about the function of mythological texts in Scripture. In the beginning stages, I was drawing upon Jungian models of symbolism and myth as metaphor, but as my research developed to incorporate a stronger emphasis on the Hebrew Bible Psalter, I gravitated toward the field of biblical ethics. So today I want to share a summary of my research on reading Psalm 82 ethically as an appeal for justice. The Psalter is not the typical go-to book for ethics. I found that out many times when I told people that I was working on my dissertation on Psalms and ethics. And I cannot tell you the number of times that I was stopped by a fellow scholar saying, "You mean Proverbs and ethics, right?" And I would say, "No, Psalms and ethics." And I've been asked a number of times what Psalms has to do with ethics. Well, I will tell you at least what Psalm 82 has to do with ethics, although I imagine that this reading could be, and I have tested some to take this reading into other Psalms texts as well. So I hope you're inspired thusly. When I started out in my research, especially, there was not a clear model for reading a single Psalm as ethical. However, scholars like Patrick Miller continually mentioned Psalm 82 as a psalm concerned with justice and justice efforts. A few scholars like Susan Gillingham and Norbert Lofink brought Psalm 82 into a discussion of how we think about the poor and how we treat the poor, which could be considered ethical. However, most scholars who looked at Psalm 82 were more interested in resolving the curious aspects of Psalm 82's mythological nature, especially regarding its references to divine counsel and the death and life of deities in the ancient world. There is no denying that the mythological provenance of Psalm 82 is one of the most interesting features of the psalm, and Julian Morgenstern's 1939 thesis entitled "The Mythological Background of Psalm 82" was a starter shot for 20th century biblical scholars to defend and deny possible conclusions that Israel's deity, Yahweh, might be just one among a number of other gods in Psalm 82. This also launched a discussion about where the matters of injustice take place in Psalm 82. Is it in the divine realm or in the human realm? Only two scholars, Nir and Nasuti, concluded that there might be some ambiguity at play. This is in the mid and late 20th century, recommending a more focused look at the unique psalm. I followed this cue to see also how ambiguity in the composition of Psalm 82 may lead us toward an ethical reading. And this is when I ran across Gordon Wenham's book, Psalms as Torah, which is based on the premise that the Psalter is a collection of psalms which encourage implicit response as much as they encourage participation. He asserted that an agenda is set by the leader of prayers or songs in a community, a religious community, that establishes the virtue of what is being prayed or sung. The congregant's collective response then is often an affirming amen, which also affirms the values of teaching in the liturgy that's being recited. So it is this way for the Psalms. Each psalm may become useful especially in a liturgical setting, to act as a prayer or song that requires a response of agreement from a congregation that is listening and or singing and or saying along with the liturgy. The poetic form of Psalm 82 emphasizes what is wrong when injustice is unchecked in the world. The psalm forms a series of bicola with the tricolon at verse 5, which gives the reader the stakes for injustice. and that is an earth that is unstable at its very foundations. The verses before this speak about salvation for the lowest beings in existence, and the verse just following speaks about the divine entities who exist at the highest planes of imagined or real existence in the heavens at the time. This is a kind of merism that demonstrates an inclusive paradigm that leads the reader to its inevitable conclusion. There is no one outside the matter of injustice that is described in Psalm 82. The psalm concludes with verse 8, which has sometimes been called a liturgical response to lament. In some ways, Psalm 82:8 seems to represent a cry or appeal for restoration for the setting to right of the world, but it still leaves the reader in want of a sense of resolve, a clear conclusion to the chaos that has been described in the psalm. This is, I believe, a way of extending an ethical appeal of justice for the poor beyond the divine realms and toward a human audience. Psalm 82 is a text that encourages both an ethical reading and an ethical response. Looking for parallels among other ancient Near Eastern texts, I found that social traditions in the ancient Near East have a long-standing tradition of prioritizing care for the poor and marginalized. It is the duty of the king on both sides of the Levant, Egypt and Mesopotamia, to uphold the value of the respective deity of justice to care for the poor. The Hebrew Bible also includes this virtue for the Israelites who are under Yahweh's protection. While social structure varies on the specifics, the responsibility of the powerful to care for the weak is a common theme throughout the known world of the Hebrew Bible. The requirement to uphold justice for the poor is closely linked to the tradition of a cry for justice. The cry for justice appears in ancient Near Eastern legislative texts as well as in the Hebrew Bible. Mesopotamian kings swear an oath to ensure justice by eliminating cries for justice. That's the measurable test of if justice has been done, that the cry for justice is no longer. This is evidenced in the prologues to the Laws of Hammurabi, circa 1750-ish BCE, and the prologue to the Laws of Lipit Ishtar of Isin, circa 1930 BCE. The Hebrew Bible also acknowledges this tradition. Consider, for example, Isaiah 5:7, which demonstrates a cry for justice that rises to God. And in Exodus, the slaves cry out under their burden before God remembers them in response. The cry for justice requires a just response from a ruling authority, a king or a deity usually. In Psalm 82, there is a cry for justice on behalf of the poor that demands a response from gods who seem to be ignoring the plight of the marginalized or those in need. The study of linguistic and cultural connections between Psalm 82 and other ancient Near Eastern literature demonstrates commonalities of virtue in the ancient world. Liturgy was not exclusive to the ancient Israelites, but they clearly adopted the practice as an essential part of the cultus. The Psalter is a container of songs and prayers that get at the substance of an Israelite practice of worship. Psalm 82 is important then to the liturgical function because it is included in the Hebrew Psalter. The influence of a practiced liturgy upon its practitioner is an infusion of implicit ethics by what they say or sing, as Wenham pointed out. The specific nature of the ethical influence may be determined by the language of a psalm, its social orientation, or its cultural allusions. In the case of Psalm 82, its mythological provenance that connects it with texts and liturgies from other languages and social groupings in the ancient Near East gives us insight into its social orientation and its cultural affectation and the social orientation of those who are reading and participating in the readership of the psalm. The language of the psalm demonstrates a compositional focus on ethical themes such as righteousness and justice. Particular ambiguities in the text complement an indeterminate reading that relies on the context of the reader and their understanding of not only the virtue signaled in the text, but also an apparent understanding of the world around them. In other words, the impact of liturgical use of an ethical text provokes the reader and reciter of the text to become aware of their privilege and of the privilege and or needs of others. What really stood out to me most in Psalm 82 was the linguistic emphasis on marginalized people. The list of synonyms for the poor or disadvantaged is rather extensive in Psalm 82 verses 3 and 4. It is the most dense list of synonyms for the poor in the Hebrew Bible. A study of these terms demonstrated that they appear uniquely ordered in Psalm 82. For example, the orphan appears without the widow, as is common in other areas of the Hebrew Bible. And the normal Hindiatas of Ani and Avon is split up so that they're on different levels in the poetry, each occurring independently, whereas they normally occur together in the Hebrew Bible and in the Psalter. These terms of poverty occur regularly throughout the Psalter, but they are not condensed in this way, except for in Psalm 82. So I extended my linguistic study to look at other terms for powerless or marginalized individuals in Hebrew, to include the widow and the foreigner, which don't exist as individual entities in the list of Psalm 82 verses 3 and 4. So I have a slide that kind of summarizes this. Need to, one second, I just need to find it. Oh, let's see. Sorry, I haven't used the share screen before, but okay. I'm gonna try this. Sorry, bear with me one second. Okay, I can't do that, I guess, without restarting my computer. Okay, well, I'll be happy to send that out. Send that out to you if you want, or feel free to email me. But I did a comprehensive study of the language of the poor in Psalm 82 throughout the Psalter and the Hebrew Bible to determine the frequency of use of certain words for the marginalized, to compare with how they are condensed in Psalm 82. The list of terms in Psalm 82 includes terms for the poor, which are both common and uncommon descriptors in the rest of the Psalter. Some words like ani and avion are extremely common, while others such as rosh and dal are extremely rare. In Psalm 82, terms of justice surround the terms for the poor, so they encapsulate them in the poetry. Verses 3 and 4 each contain two terms for justice, bookending the synonyms for the poor. This is a poetic feature that I believe demands a responsive justice. It literally couches the poor in terms of salvation and freedom and justice, so that even the language of the poor is protected by the speaker of Psalm 82, verses 3 and 4. This definitely brings the text into a human realm emphasis. So we have started this scene with a scene in the heavens and the divine realm, just much like the opening of Job and other ancient Near Eastern mythological texts. And then we immediately jump into a human paradigm, the marginalized and the poor and the orphan, and these that are needy and hungry, that need salvation, that are being rampaged by wickedness, are in the earthly realm. And there is a demand for a just response. The composer wants our attention to be turned toward the poor as those harmed by injustice, even passive injustice that's being allowed to hinder freedom and salvation. So there's an implicit ethical response that is called out for. Psalm 82 emphasizes disadvantaged humans as desperate for an ethical and just response, and includes language of justice that empowers the reader to respond in an ethical way. On a compositional level, Psalm 82 includes ambiguity that contributes to its ease of access throughout time. Recognizing Psalm 82 as ambiguous helps the reader get past the hangups that scholars are experiencing by focusing on the mythological context of the psalm and trying to work out how the context is justified for modern monotheistic religions who consider the Psalm sacred. Identifying ambiguity in a biblical text has become a recent trend in biblical scholarship. Some scholars have been more descriptive of how they determine ambiguity is at work in the composition, such as Firth and Lindsay, and others are less specific. In my study, I leaned on William Empson's 7 types of ambiguity to avoid a loose reader response style conclusion. Psalm 82 meets several of Empson's criteria. One is details are effectively interpreted in multiple ways. 2, multiple possibilities exist within a single resolution. 3, there's a simultaneous use of unconnected meanings. And 4, alternative meanings which combine to clarify intention. I won't go into the details of how each of these play out, but if you actually read several English interpretations of Psalm 82, you could see a lot of that for yourself. The ambiguity of Psalm 82 plays an important role in guiding the reader to access the ethical message of the psalm more easily. What I found is that it becomes a kind of vehicle for bringing readers from different backgrounds and different understandings about who God is or who the gods are and what they believe about gods to the text and more directly and centrally into the ethical message of the text. There's an ambiguity that leans into an ethical response and provides for a broad readership. In the presentation of a polyvalence or the acceptance of a polyvalent reading of Psalm 82, the text invites readers from varied backgrounds to participate directly in the ethics and the demand for justice that's called for in Psalm 82. So Psalm 82 then becomes not just a message of warning for the gods of the ancient Near East, nor is it just for the kings who are charged with upholding the will of the gods, nor is it just for the elders who judge in the city gates, nor just for the prophet who cries out in the wilderness, but it is for everyone who by reading this psalm enters into the poetic narrative and discovers within themselves the way they can extend power in their own sphere of influence to stop injustice from carrying away the poor, the needy, and the marginalized. The psalm is a cry for justice that speaks comfort to the marginalized, that there is someone that sees the injustice and then asks readers to respond ethically. Ambiguity in Psalm 82 makes way for its use not only in Proto-Israelite Levant, such as its orientation possibly dating back to Bronze Age or early Israelite Northern Kingdom literature, depending on who you ask, but it also extends into the Second Temple period where the Psalter was likely compiled. Psalm 82 may be read in the Second Temple as resistance literature that subverts an authority whose rule is creating injustices for people who are not in power. Resistance literature is a term coined in the mid-20th century. It is meant to draw attention to literature that subverts its own authoritative process or authority figures while remaining still part of the mainstream literature, like Psalm 82 remaining in the Psalter, even though it does not uphold a clear monotheistic, Yahwistic worship, like most of the Psalms. This ensures that it will be widely read, even though it contains a message of subversion. Historically, Second Temple period Israelites were seeking to define their identity post-exile. Ezra Nehemiah tells this story. Second Temple Judah was inhabited by a diverse group of people. According to the historical records, Jewish identity was being defined in an exclusive way that promoted a kind of ethnic division that was perceived as a threat to exile many inhabitants of the region. There is, however, evidence of an active opposition against the building of a wall, an outcast of its inhabitants in Ezra Nehemiah, who failed to meet the requirements of post-exilic Judaism. Nehemiah 6:10-14 describes the prophetess Noadiah, for example, who is considered a leader among Israel's prophets by a few scholars, as she is engaged in political activism against Nehemiah's efforts. Some scholars suggest that she was an advocate for the poor and marginalized among the inhabitants of Israel in that time. Psalm 82 also then stands for similar ideals. It is a liturgical text formatted to be useful in public spaces of worship. that speaks out against a hegemonic influence that would disenfranchise the marginalized. Psalm 82, in conclusion, is a poetic narrative written with a mythological context in mind and orientation. Psalm 82 is ambiguous and a possible example of resistance literature in the Hebrew Bible. These features both invite an ethical response. Psalm 82 has a long history of interpretation that is centuries old. I was drawn to this psalm because of its mythical origins and uniqueness in the Psalter, but what I discovered is that its message was a powerful indicator of an obvious biblical ethic, and that is, justice is a virtue that must be held in high regard by all. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Now, are you in charge, Anastasia?
Yeah.
Oh, there's Ben. Is that Ben with a hand? Terrific. If you can
Ben is clapping.
I was just applauding. I was delighted. I thought that
Oh, you
was
were
awesome.
applauding.
So I was
Oh,
just
excellent.
applauding.
Okay, right. Okay. Well, we'll allow that. I can't see everybody. Can other people see everybody? Is it just because I've got the wrong view on? Oh, now I can see everybody. Right. Thank you, Erica. Ben has applauded, and others of us no doubt would like to do that. But if you'd like to, you could use your hand to signify that you want to ask a question, and then I will invite you to do so. Until I see a hand or two, I'm going to abuse the chair's privilege and ask a question or two. I was struck by the phrase, the liturgical use of an ethical text. Because I think I would have thought what you were talking about was the ethical use of a liturgical text. And I wonder if you'd like to, if there's some, whether it's worth thinking about that different way of putting it, because prima facie, Psalm 82 is a liturgical text. And you're saying that maybe it was designed to be used, certainly could be used in an ethical way, which is kind of different from something which is an ethical text that then gets used liturgically. Do you see what I mean by the difference? Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I do see what you mean, and I think, yeah, you're right. I think that we tend to look at the text, I guess, as primarily a liturgical text, and then we're thinking about an ethical reading of that. But I think maybe it's because of how I came to Psalm 82, and I don't come from a liturgical tradition. So for me, I saw it first as an ethical text.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Before I considered it as part of the liturgy. So it was only during my studies of my dissertation that I actually even discovered that it was in the Book of Common Prayer.
Right. So do you think you're inclined to think that it was designed to be an ethical text, but then putting it liturgically is a way of enabling it to do its ethical work?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
I'm inclined to think that it was composed composed in its provenance as an ethical text.
Right.
Yes.
But your point about your stress on ambiguity would make me inclined to say, as a person who likes ambiguity himself, it could be either. You could read it either way. It could be an ethical text that was used liturgically, or a liturgical text that was used ethically. It's open to both kind of readings.
Yes. Yeah. I would think so as well.
Right. I see John's hand. Would you like to unmute yourself and speak, John?